dynamic. All right, looks like we're going live. All right, so as we are getting kicked off, we had several people in the waiting room. I'm Zach Duke with Finosec, and I've got Kurtis from DCI. We'll give everybody a few minutes just to join. I was actually joking before we jumped on that I felt like I needed to wear my USA soccer jersey today, as I'm very excited about the World Cup. I know some of y'all that are on, you're like, what is he talking about? Some of y'all may be in the same boat. So one of the things we can do is we actually have chat going on. So if you click on chat, you can actually go in and correspond. So maybe a question or an icebreaker is, who's going to be watching the game tonight? See if anybody's actually out there. And y'all can all just leave me hanging and I'll just keep rambling through, right? Yeah. But I like to do that. So again, you should have the chat. And again, I'm Zach Duke, CEO of Finosec. And Kurtis, why don't we kick this off? We're a little bit up after the hour and go through. And you want to start with just the partner journey?
Yeah, absolutely. And Zach, thank you for bringing me on. Thank you everybody for being on the webinar today. Super excited to hear from Zach and the Finosec team and what they're doing in the community banking industry right now. I don't get to announce partnerships and do this very often, so very excited. And like I said, looking forward to hearing what Zach has to say. So this has been a long process, as Zach can attest to that probably for us here, but he's been patient and done all the right things, said all the right things over the last, honestly, 3 years now. When it comes to us just evaluating this space in the market right now. We've sat through many demos and conversations, and kind of got Zach to know Zach on a more personal level as well throughout that. And it just kind of became very, very clear to us that the passion Zach has for community banking and the Finosec team is there and represents what DCI does as a whole every day too, and your guys' passion as well for community banks. And Zach's a great representative of that in the industry. Another one too, like I said, we've sat through many products and demos, and Finosec's innovation right now. They're continuing to evolve products. They continue to revolutionize kind of how banks approach the vendor management, compliance, and information security side of things. Like I said, they're always kind of a step ahead in understanding what the regulators are doing out there in the market right now. And like I said, just have a full understanding and completely, innovative with their products right now. So obviously we always take into consideration when vetting any vendor price point. Finosec also brings a very high quality and cost effective product to the market. That's one thing we really look at is, are they going to be able to scale down to size and bring a competitive price point with the correct product as well? And Finosec seems to do that perfectly for us. So, obviously, like I said, I got to know Zach on more personal level, and again, became clear with he just represents the DCI core values as well too on what we represent, and focus on community customer service. And he might get on to me for saying this, but he's always a phone call away. I think he will be that for our customers as well too, and just really represent what it means in the customer support side of things too. So as we all know, the landscape continues to evolve right now with increasing regulatory expectations and complex audits. Obviously, the discussions of fourth party vendor management, the use of AI. Our internal teams are just being kind of stretched thinner than they ever have before, and trying to fill in that gap, like I said, over the last 3 years, and really narrowed it down to Finosec and what Zach's doing to really fill our gap in a meaningful, scalable way for our customers. So again, I appreciate you guys joining the call. Excited to hear what Zach has to say. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him and let him have his time here. So.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Kurtis. I think one of the things that landed for me, so for those of you that have not seen me speak or heard me speak before, a couple of kind of things. One is I think I'm funny, and I'll probably only land 10% of the conversation. So just full disclosure, you're allowed to heckle. As we're going through today, you can use the chat as a great way to ask questions as we're going through. If you're like me and you are likely to forget what the question was, that's a great way to kind of have it. I'll try to be watching that, but if things come up in those pieces, happy to talk through. Additionally, as we go through today, I think there's an important piece of really what we saw in the partnership with DCI is the alignment on reputation matters. And it's something that for DCI to recommend us, we know that's not an insignificant thing. And I think you'll see as we talk through today, the way we run the business and the way we think of the challenges for community bankers like y'all is very, very similar. So with that being said, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to start with what I just call the 4 truths or the 4 challenges. And really as part of that, there's these 2 main buckets that we see. The first, and we're going to spend some time talking about the specifics of this, is the regulatory expectations continue to expand. So when you think about your next IT exam, IT audit, the regulatory world continues to grow. And a lot of that is because of the increased sophistication of cyber attacks. And the fact of the matter is we could spend all day today talking through just those 2 items in real world cases that have hit institutions and community bankers like y'all. And the challenge becomes is those 2 items really stretch the typical community banker really thin. I love to joke, if you're in community banking long enough, you know this. If you miss a meeting, you just get more hats or more job responsibilities because we're spread so thin. And the advantage is there's never a dull moment. The challenge becomes we have all these competing responsibilities. And again, going over to those 2 in the front is really hard. We're not like a Bank of America or Wells Fargo where you have a floor of people that are doing these things. And then lastly, we get handcuffed by legacy systems and processes, things that we have in place that are manual, labor intensive, and difficult to manage. When you think about this information security, cybersecurity, third-party risk management, governance. So I want to jump into some of the specifics around what's going on in the compliance world. So the first is the sunset of the CAT. We're going to have several resources as we talk through today. At the end, they're going to be available. But if you're not aware, the regulators sunset the predominant assessment tool for every community bank in the U.S. effective August 31st of last year. We're seeing kind of 2 main trends going on. One is institutions are still trying to figure out, hey, what am I going to do? The other side is we've seen institutions use NIST or CRI or other frameworks and actually figure out, gosh, I got a lot of work to do. It's just really complicated. And that's created, again, going back to that regulatory challenge. I've actually got a more thorough webinar, but I wanted to highlight a couple of specific things in there. So the first is in our research, and we actually built a cybersecurity assessment tool replacement for community banks. And you're going to hear through that as we go through today. But this sunset really has become a major change. Now, going back in time, it was implemented 10 years ago. The first year, and interestingly, if you were part of the first year to go through the FFIEC cybersecurity assessment tool, you know this, it was a real pain the first year. We've actually found only about 40% of the folks that are actually doing the cybersecurity assessment tool replacement were involved in that initial review. So for those of you that were involved, I know you know it's a pain. For those of you that weren't, just understand that you kind of dodged a bullet. But the flip side is there's some things here. And I use this picture. This goes back to my USA soccer thing. This is from July 4th, all the way back in 2017. That is a picture of my family. So I've got my wife and my 3 kids. And then fast forward, this is the picture now. Look, just a few things have changed. Just kind of from those components. So I've got to give you the quick rundown. First off, there's a new addition. That is my 4-year-old son. My wife and I have actually been married now, just rolled over 25 years. She's an absolute saint. And now I have a 21-year-old, a 19-year-old, and a 7-year-old, and then, of course, the drum roll of the 4-year-old. And I use this as an example. One is just to show what can change since 2017. Now, when you think about the cyber assessment tool, a lot of things have changed. So you have things like new risks, mean, ransomware really wasn't around in 2017, for surely not like it is today. The implementation of things of AI and APIs and real-time payments was not in the same world. So there's been a lot of functional changes. And really the reason why the regulators changed or sunset the cybersecurity assessment tool is because of that. Now, I joke about this. One of the things that I think was really funny in the history of the cybersecurity assessment tool is the regulator said it was optional. It was not optional. I mean, really, in all facts or matter, you had to have a solution that was better than the one that the regulators had. And we've seen this trend of this kind of vagueness in the way that they kind of talk through things being a significant challenge. They gave us 4 replacement options. So there's NIST, there's CRI, there's CISA Financial Services, and then there's CIS Controls. As we did our review, we actually saw there really wasn't a clear community bank solution. And really from that, we went through and created a process that we'll talk through later around the concept of the replacement for the CAT. And then there's some specific things we're actually doing with DCI in partnership with that. But I want to spend the time initially just setting the stage on the regulatory. So we have the cyber assessment tool. That's a big thing going on. We also have the updated guidance for third-party risk management, or if you want to sound really in the know, call it TPRM. Of course, everything we do today around technology, we'd love to do abbreviations and acronyms. But the concept of vendor management, vendor reviews, has really changed to this concept of TPRM. Again, this is another place where we could spend an hour today talking to you about the expectations that have changed, the dynamics of where the regulators are really focused. And this has been a lot of the conversations that we've had over the years with DCI and the partnership, was this concept of how do we help address this? So if I had to summarize the guidance, it really has 5 steps. There are some foundational changes. You know, one of the things I used to talk about years ago when I would train on then known as vendor management, not TPRM, this concept of if you sign a contract before you've done your risk assessment, make sure you backdate it. Anybody ever been in that world of, hey, we signed this contract and now I've got to go do my due diligence to backfill? In this scenario, you really don't set that up until after step 3. So now what they want you to have is not just the due diligence process complete, but really they want you to align it to your strategic plan. And what are the things that you're trying to accomplish? Now, one of the things I love to do, and my team heckles me on this, is I like to try to simplify things. And they seem to think for some reason I don't always simplify things, but there's a whole nother story associated with that. But if I could go back to this concept of strategic planning, really what's important for you to be thinking about is really, I would bubble it up to 2 main things. One is, how do you better serve your customers? How do you have technology solutions integrating into things like mobile, into how you do communications to them to be able to better service the customers? The second thing is how do you put solutions in place to create efficiency and remove manual effort and operational burden? So really from a strategic planning standpoint, what they're wanting you to do is say, hey, where are you? What are the things you have in place? And for me, it really goes to those 2 things. Then you still need to do due diligence. There's a lot more information they have that's very prescriptive around that concept. They want you to review the contracts, but then it doesn't stop after you sign the agreement. You still have to do ongoing monitoring. And then you need to have termination thought through beforehand. So as we talk through today, there are some unique challenges around this new guidance and expectations, and some questions for you to think about today as I'm talking through that is, has your process or your plan changed on how you manage your vendors or this concept of third-party risk management based on the updated guidance? And that creates this tension again of those staffing challenges. And how do I go do this when I have all these other hats or responsibilities I have to manage and wear? Now, one of the things that we're at a very, very unique spot in technology for community banking. And that's actually one of the places I'm the most excited. And it's this concept of how AI is going to change. Now, what's interesting, this is actually a chart from Gartner on the AI hype cycle. And this is so spot on. I mean, essentially what happened with AI is it started getting used. And then all of a sudden, when you start using it, you're like, this is the best thing since sliced bread. It's going to do everything and it's going to automate all these pieces. And then all of a sudden, you start getting these challenges of, gosh, it hallucinated. I remember I was doing early on years ago, I was writing a great blog post leveraging AI. And then I figured out it was wrong. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad I had a human in the loop and some checks and balances. So then you kind of go through this process where you're going down, where you get in the trial of disillusionment, and then slowly we go up from there. Now, what's interesting is each and every one of you is in a different spot on that hype cycle. Some of you are thinking, gosh, this is awesome. Some of you are like, I'm not sure this trial of disillusionment's ever going to come. I'm concerned that I'm just going to be stuck in this world where I can't trust it. And some of you are on this path towards, hey, how do I actually make these things work? And when you think about third-party risk management, AI is going to foundationally have an impact on how we manage things, both from an AI governance perspective, as well as what types of solutions and what the processes are in the market. I've actually got a whole session as I talk about webinars and future content that we'll be going through around AI governance and just these concepts of how do we go manage these things. Now, in addition to the third-party risk management and kind of the challenges associated there, we're also seeing the regulatory trends around this concept of authentication guidance. Now, this was put out by the FFIEC, so it's got FDIC on my picture here, but it was the FFIEC, so it's FDIC, the Fed, OCC, regardless of your regulators, they now have these expectations. And it foundationally changed previous guidance. Now, the guidance that was changed was all the way back from 2005 and 2011. And the guidance that came out then was really around the internet banking environment and how you protect yourself. And there was these concepts. I'm going to go back in time. If you remember, you would log into your internet banking, and then there was a picture that was your two-factor. Anybody remember that? I use this picture. One is I think it's funny. Again, congratulations. I kind of try to build in a little humor as part of this. And at least I'm laughing at myself as I go through. But I had a horse, was mine. Now, it wasn't this horse. I put this one on because I think it's funny. But because I had that horse in my internet banking, right, all of a sudden it was secure. And really the authentication guidance from 05 and 11 was only around the concepts of internet banking. Well, now it's expanded to how you manage access for all your employees, how you manage to list privilege, how you do multi-factor. And we've actually seen formal actions. This is actually from a $500 million community bank in Texas that actually got formally written up related to the concepts of access management. So this isn't a verbal warning. This is not a, hey, they got written up. This is a memorandum of understanding, a dynamic where it was a consent order, public knowledge. And really what it says within 30 days, bank systems to be reviewed must include the following: core, network, internet banking, debit card, APIs, production databases, retail, list goes on. So what we've seen now is it's not only the authentication guidance, but it's also findings both from audits and examiners. Now, the challenges with this, and this is part of when we talk through the DCI, is the way we get reports, the way we manage all these systems. And it's not just DCI. This is a sample report from the core system, but it's also all of your applications, all of the DCI ecosystem of how we manage permissions for all of your employees become part of the challenges. So when you think about Finosec, really what we're going to talk through today is really a couple of things. One is how we address those regulatory expectations, and then the concepts of how do we go streamline and create efficiency for your team. We talk a lot about this concept of deleting the spreadsheet, deleting the manual process. And as we talk through today, I want you to be thinking about how you get prepared for your next IT exam, how you go through your processes inside the organization. One of the things that we start with is this concept of how the platform works. Now, one of the things you're going to hear consistently across the conversation today is inside of our platform, we've built an AI assistant, Reggie Ranger, and he's an expert. So what he allows us to do is to really streamline and facilitate processes for you and your team. The first example of that I'm going to kind of talk through that we've assisted is the Finosec Cybersecurity Assessment Tool. Now, we built this in partnership with the ICBA. We've had regulatory conversations with the Fed, FDIC, the OCC. We actually trained 86 state regulators on this, really specifically around the concepts and the challenges that community banks have. And the other profiles that are out there really create some unique challenges. Again, I've got a more in-depth webinar that I'm going to have as an option around the challenges and then really how we directly address this. But there's some things I want to highlight with our tool. The first is it's the exact same process as the FFIEC CAT. This is the same scenario that you've used since 2015, where you assess your maturity and your institution inherent risk. You identify your gaps. You determine your desired state of maturity. You get a plan to actually implement that. You reevaluate. And then this arrow is the definition of where information security governance really is the challenge. It's not just a one-time thing. It's something we have to keep up to date. So inside the Finosec Cybersecurity Assessment Tool, there's a couple of things. One is we kept the institution inherent risk profile. We actually updated it and created the same process where you can go least through most and actually have it tuned to your institution's risk profile. We also mapped the controls from your FFIEC CAT. So we can actually import your FFIEC CAT, and almost 50% of the control questions actually directly correlate to answers you had the previous year. And one of the big things we've seen as an advantage is the executive reporting mirrors the FFIEC. So for those of you that have not made a decision, we've got a solution on that. For those of you who have went through a process and said, we've implemented NIST or CRI or CIS, and we've just found that there's a lot of work. There's actually some tips and tricks and processes that we built into our process to make that scenario much easier. And a lot of that goes back to this concept of how Reggie Ranger maps the answers from your FFIEC CAT to the specifics, maps your inherent risk, maps your input questions. So what ends up happening as part of the solution is, again, you actually have a way to be able to see your institution's inherent risk profile, just like the FFIEC CAT. We actually left 27 questions the same. We updated 13 others, some with questions and answers. Then we added 12 new ones. And essentially what ends up happening is you have a way of being able to see your risk profile from least to most. Then from the controls perspective, we're actually able to go in and map these. So this link over here, what we're actually able to go do is to show you what you said in your inherent risk profile. So this concept, what it does is it allows for you to be able to go and say, okay, I've got this new control question. This is the Finosec control process. Establish and maintain detailed enterprise asset inventory as the control. Well, we could, again, map this to what you said last year. The question on the FFIEC CAT was an inventory of organizational assets, e.g. hardware, software, data, and systems hosted externally is maintained. And you said yes with mitigating controls. So now you can go and say, well, gosh, last year, this is what I said. And one of the things we've seen specifically with the cybersecurity assessment tool is that while 2015, 2016, 2017 were really hard, it got easier over time. And what we've been able to do is incorporate that same data, that same process philosophically. Now, at the end of the day, what ends up happening is you have a report that you can take to your tech steering committee, to your executive team that has the same look, the same process, the same feel as what you've had in the past. And as I was talking through these, the scenario of the concepts of the Finosec platform and how these things correlate, there are a couple of different modules. So one obviously is the Finosec Cybersecurity Assessment Tool. But we have this built-in philosophy, and I love to pick on my co-founder. He's so different than me. Thank goodness for those of you who may know me. And essentially what he does is he puts all these processes in place. Well, he loves acronyms and abbreviations. And I don't know if this is just me or maybe this hits home for you, but gosh, acronyms and abbreviations always make me feel like I don't know what people are talking about. It's just inherently, I'm like, I don't understand. I've been working with community banks and technology for a little over 25 years. And those abbreviations always kind of get me stuck where I'm like, I don't know. I guess I should say yes. That unique dynamic we have in IT land, right? So he was talking months ago about this concept of dry. And I'm like, what is dry? Like, do I need a towel? Like, what is the concept? But this is maybe what he did for me. And as I look back, he just did this Jedi mind trick on me. He's now got it in my head. I can't get it out. And it's this concept that we built in the platform of don't repeat yourself. And really this concept of being able to have the dry methodology of if you do it one time, it does it everywhere inside the system. And when we think about DCI customers, there are some significant wins when you think about information security and cybersecurity governance and third-party risk management that really directly correlate to this dry methodology and the benefits that you'll see based on the partnership that we have with DCI. The first is this concept of the system map. So what we've actually built inside the system map is this concept of being able to go and document every system, every purpose and banking function. So I'm actually inside this system inventory. We have a list of banking applications. So there's things like ATM services, card services. I opened it up and left it on core. But essentially being able to go and say, hey, how do we do ACH? How do we do our imaging? Maybe you're using somebody different for e-statements and it's not part of the DCI family. There are these solutions and processes where we can have documentation of the purpose, the vendor, and the system or the asset, and then the business owner. Now we can go a level deeper than that. We can also go in and say, is it in-house or is it cloud? Is it managed externally? Does it have a physical asset? A great example of a physical asset would be this concept of debit card instant issuance. To actually give the debit cards back, you actually have to have a physical device. So we have a way to track that. We just added uses AI a couple months ago. I'll talk through that in a little bit about our AI governance or AI inventory strategy. Does it contain PII? And then does it have individual access, or are you adding users to that system? Now, what ends up happening from the system map, one is we have the ability of and the knowledge and the common systemicity of what DCI institutions have. But secondarily, it goes across the entire platform. So from the system map, we can populate things like your risk assessment. We can actually automate it. So going back to how that process works is it's automatically imported, and this is your information security risk assessment. It's automatically, those systems from the system map are automatically imported into the risk assessment. And from there, we've defined, based on the function of the system, industry risk, likelihood, and impact. And there's a calculation of all those for your inherent risk. Now, you can tune this, you can add threats, you can add vulnerabilities, but part of the advantage is you don't have to go through and start from scratch. You have a process or a way and a mechanism to have it. Now, those controls I was talking about for the cybersecurity assessment tool, they also directly correlate to your risk assessment. Each of these individual sections actually take into consideration the controls that you implemented, and those controls have that dry methodology as well, where they're going across the entire application. So the risk assessment then has your inherent risk, it has your control adequacy, and then your residual risk. It's all automated in the platform. From there, the system app can also go through and populate so the process again for the risk assessment is your system app. By putting in the information here, it automatically correlates based on the type of solution and asset that category is in. From there, those controls automatically go to the systems, and then your risk assessment is automated. We've also added this concept of a PII assessment. This is another great example of really where the Finosec platform and our strategy directly aligns with the challenges that we see for community banks. So almost 2 years ago, we started seeing the regulators and the examiners starting to ask community banks for this PII assessment by system. And essentially what they were trying to go do was to go and say, we want you to come through and tell us what types of customer information you have for each of your systems that you have in place today. And I use this in a couple of different ways to kind of talk about where Finosec can help and be able to facilitate. So a lot of times what we see is when that question comes up and the regulators want a new thing or the auditors want a new thing, the typical community bank will go and open up their email, and maybe this resonates for you and your team. And maybe you have solutions, or maybe you're doing things in spreadsheets today, but the solution you have or the spreadsheet you have today doesn't have a PII assessment. We got to go create it. So the concept I see is you open up your email, you add all your buddies, maybe the peers that you have that you see at DCI's annual conference, or maybe you have a state association where you're part of that team, and or maybe you add your auditors and say, hey, and you send out the email, hey, does anybody have a spreadsheet? Well, that's another system, another process, another thing to be able to update. And as we evolve, it just becomes harder and harder. And that PII assessment doesn't go over to your information security risk assessment, doesn't go over to your vendor risk assessments. And there's just unique challenges. Again, that concept of doing the same thing over and over and over again in manual tasks that the DRI methodology helps facilitate. So that's a little bit about the InfoSec governance platform. There's a lot of things in there, from policies to risk assessments and cyber insurance reviews, a whole bunch of dynamics from there. But I like to highlight those things specifically on that we're able to help. We can also help with vendor governance. And vendor governance is really kind of twofold. One is the concepts of how do we do your risk assessments? How do we follow up and make sure that we're tracking the vendors? When do we know what contracts are renewing? When's the auto renewal? All those kind of challenges associated. But really, if we could go and break this down, and I took this snapshot from Sarah. This is actually from y'all's from DCI's LinkedIn page. And just envision if you were at the DCI conference, or maybe you've been there before and you weren't there this year. And just imagine if Sarah got up and said, how many of y'all are doing vendor reviews on DCI? How many hands would go up in the room? I mean, the only folks that maybe wouldn't raise their hand are the smart community bankers that are like, oh gosh, maybe we should look at changing our core to DCI where they've got this partnership model and that dynamic, right? Maybe they're not a customer today. But in reality, when you think about those vendor reviews, but if I expanded it out, how about the other common systems that we see with DCI? Folks like, maybe it's Allied or Autobooks, right? Maybe it's the dynamic of Risk Out, Plaid, the list of vendors kind of goes on that we typically see in a DCI customer base, right? So what if that process was streamlined? So what we've built is an ability to be able to automate and streamline the vendor reviews. And one of the best ways we do that is the document upload. So essentially we take the due diligence packet, and that's going to be the SOC reports. That's going to be all of the due diligence information. So it's going to be things like cyber insurance, the policies, disaster recovery test, financials, list goes on, right? And then what happens is we actually analyze those documents with Reggie Ranger, our AI assistant. And then Reggie actually will create the vendor review and the summary. And this is a great example of how technology can change the game for community banking. And when you think about this process, now all of a sudden we're able to do a more thorough review of the due diligence packet. Now, very transparently, we don't believe that AI is ready for just the AI does it and you get the AI result. At Finosec, we always have a human in the loop. So we have a advisor team, a group of folks that are information security experts in banking that are the human in the loop before we send the documentation back to you on the review. But if I could paint a target for you, or maybe an example of really where this helps, take a step back and just envision that you were the information security officer, or maybe the vendor leader at Bank of America. First off, that sounds probably pretty stressful, right? But bear with me. Do you think the information security officer at Bank of America is doing the SOC report reviews and pulling out the user entity controls and who the fourth party vendors are and making sure that the gap letters are up to date? Or do you think they have somebody that does it for them? I mean, sure, they're going to have somebody, they're going to have a team, they're going to have a floor of people that are doing these things. But what happens with AI, specifically in this use case, all of a sudden you have the ability of being able to level the playing field with how the big banks' operational efficiencies are created, because they have this infrastructure and process. And now all of a sudden, by leveraging tools like Reggie Ranger, we can foundationally change the amount of work and the effort and the process, and then have consistency across the board for you and your team. So as part of vendor governance, we have really the ability of doing the vendor reviews. We can automate that process. We can also help facilitate with all of the risk and the governance processes associated. The next area we can help is access management. And with access management, there's really a couple of different ways that we are actually helping. And essentially what we've built in the platform is the ability for us to be able to track every system for every employee, be able to streamline your user access reviews, be able to make sure that you know your terminated employees are no longer having access. And essentially what we've done is we've taken the standard report. So for DCI, it's the standard report for security. This is obviously kind of a screenshot or an example of that. That could be the same for things like your correspondent bank, for Fedline, for other systems and processes. I've got some examples here: Active Directory, how you do bill pay, if you're using BSA or Risk Out, Plaid, neural payments, SQN, maybe even your managed service provider. And essentially what we've done is we've taken this standard report from those systems and those processes, you upload it into our platform, and then the user access review process foundationally changes. The first thing we're going to be able to highlight for you is terminated employees. That's the most common audit finding we see, is that somebody forgot to remove an employee from a system. Well, it's because they're all separate and they don't speak to each other. And how do I know? And I don't have a great way to track all the systems for every employee. So that's the first thing we do. The second thing we do, and go into that specific report from DCI, we can give you high-risk privileged access permissions for your employees. Things like general ledger, maintenance, online transaction entry, dormant accounts. And all of a sudden, we're able to go and highlight the most critical permissions that we want to track and be able to make sure that the employees that have that are correct. If you're the person that's doing the user access reviews, the other game changer we have is we can give you the changes since the last review. So if you upload the DCI report, you run through that, the next time you upload it, we can give you not only the terminated employees, not only the privileged access, but we can also show you what changed from the previous report. We can also have a way for you to track your service accounts and your vendor accounts, things like your auditors, the integrations and the processes that you have for access to core, as well as a way to have your documentation and approvals. And at the end of the day, when I was talking about authentication guidance and the access management and the expectations the regulators had with what we've seen in the beginning, what this does is it changes the game on the way that you're able to manage your processes internally. All of that's in one spot. Again, you have the ability of seeing the privileged access. You have the ability to sign off on those. And really the superpower we have is, with the DCI partnership, is our team is working hand in hand with them on what's the report look like? Did anything change? What are the privileged access components? And all of a sudden, the ability of us being able to service you as a DCI customer is enhanced and easier and better. Now, if I had to summarize all of these things, a lot of what we see the conversation that starts, and again, you may have some tools in place for part of what we talked about today, but then some of the things that you have maybe it's still in spreadsheets. So a lot of what we see in these manual processes are things like your to-do lists. Think of this. How do you know what you're supposed to take to the board, to your tech steering committee? When you get your pre-exam questionnaire or your pre-audit questionnaire, how do you know you've got everything accomplished? A lot of times we Outlook to-dos, spreadsheets, yellow sticky notes. Like the challenge is real in that. Maybe for vendor management, maybe you have a vendor management risk assessment spreadsheet, or maybe you have a tool for that, but you're still doing the vendor reviews really manually and reviewing the SOC reports and pulling out the user entity controls and figuring out how we map these things. It can be things like exception tracking or your risk assessments or your cyber insurance review. Again, spreadsheets, manual processes, the cyber assessment tool, or maybe on the access management. Maybe you've got a spreadsheet that on the bottom, it's got all these tabs. And it's either on that tab, it's got every employee or it's got every system. And you click on that tab and you can see all the systems for that employee or every employee that has access to that system. But then when somebody changes job roles, the challenge becomes real, because what happens is in community banking, your team stays at the bank for a long time. It's very common. And the longer you're at the bank, the more responsibilities you get. Probably preaching to the choir as I say that. So now all of a sudden you've got these new access or these things that should have been removed from that spreadsheet. And hey, how did those processes come? And all these dynamics create what I would just call acts of heroism. So if you and or your team is managing information security in these processes, or that PII assessment that I mentioned earlier, and now all of a sudden you're going to Risk Scout for BSA because it's awesome and their team is really doing some really cool integration with DCI. But now you got to go update your PII assessment spreadsheet and your access management spreadsheet and your vendor risk assessment and your tool for this and these processes. And what that happens is now there's redundancy and repetitive work. And then what we do know is when the auditors and the examiners come in, if you have something that doesn't match in those spreadsheets, that's where we get sideways. That's where the real challenges come. So it creates this level of tension and anxiety that we have to manage through. So at the end of the day, really, that's what we're focused in on, these the concepts of taking these regulatory challenges, these acts of heroism that you and your team have to go through, leveraging in the relationship and the partnership with DCI. So we have the access management reporting and the system map documentation. And when there's a new partner that's coming in through DCI, we're in the loop and in the know. And there's a new rollout of a solution that comes through, or this product or platform has this enhancement or this report changed. Through the partnership, it allows for us to be able to do that for not just one DCI customer, but for everybody across the board. Now, one of the things that we've actually went through specifically with DCI, and there's a couple of things that we're doing specifically based on this partnership. So the first one is actually every single DCI customer has the ability to do a free trial of the Finosec CAT. That's our cybersecurity assessment tool that, again, we built. So there's a free trial version, and then there's a paid for version. The free trial, you give essentially the same functionality. You do not get the data import, which is really kind of one of the big time savers that we've seen. But you do get a way to kind of try out and see what the institution inherent risk profile looks like, how the questions correlate. It really kind of gives you a way and a mechanism to be able to try this process beforehand. The other thing we're doing is a manual assessment. And essentially what our team does is we meet with you, have a discussion with your team, and create a list of, hey, here are the things that you're doing manually. And we found that this process can be so beneficial for your leadership team to understand, for your technology steering committee to understand. When you think about your budgeting process, as we start going towards, crazy to start thinking about budgeting, but you start getting into August and September and October, that kicks back up and we're going through that. This manual assessment actually gives it a way and a mechanism for you to be able to have a conversation with your team around, here are the things that we're doing manually. Here's the risk and exposure because we're doing it manually. And look, I've been doing this a long time with community banks. Just because you go through and you say, hey, here are the things I'm doing mainly, doesn't mean you're going to always get help, but it helps the conversation. And really, more importantly, it allows for you to be able to articulate, especially if you're the person doing the work. Here's what I'm doing manually that I just want to make sure you know I'm concerned on its accuracy, and it costs me a lot of time. Really super beneficial from a kind of higher raising the conversation out of all the details into here's really the important things. We've also got a couple of webinars coming up, and we can get you the links for these. There's the CAT sunset countdown. We're doing those on a pretty recurring component where we're going more in depth on the challenges and then how the Finosec cybersecurity assessment tool can help. And we also have an upcoming webinar on automating your information security program, really going in more depth around how that dry methodology correlates through and how these processes kind of correlate. So there's a couple of to-dos. We'll be sending you a copy of the presentation today, so you'll have this kind of recorded version. But if you want the free trial or the manual assessment, if you just want to put in the chat free trial or manual assessment or meet with the team. If you want the webinar links, just put in webinar and we'll make sure we get those links to you as part of that process. And really the heart of really everything that we have, which I think goes back to why we're so honored, or maybe even a better way to say it is we want to be a good steward of the partnership with DCI. We take that as a dynamic where we have a responsibility because of the way that their partnership program, and really with the way that you look at the partnership with DCI, we have a responsibility to be intentional around how we walk alongside you. And at the end of the day, really all we want to do is we want to help. So having dialogue, things as we go through this partnership discussion, we're going to be talking through our AI governance strategies, exam trends, and the list will go on. So we're very excited around this concepts of being able to help you and your team be able to manage these things more efficiently. And really my goal today was to talk a little bit about here are the challenges we see, here's how we can help specifically for the DCI world. And with that being said, I've got my contact information down below. One of the things that I think the way we run the business is very similar to the way the DCI runs. If you become a customer of Finosec, every single customer has my cell phone. And I'm blessed. I think I mentioned this in the front end. I'm CEO and founder. I've got a phenomenal team. And as you start having conversations and hear how we're able to do what we'll do, you'll see that. But I'm always available and I'm able to be in. And then we know that everyone knows everyone in this industry. When you do a good job, it just travels at this. And that's a lot of where we are. I'm also on LinkedIn. Love to connect with you there. But with that being said, I'll open it up to questions or, Kurtis, I see you on. I don't know if there's any other things as you heard me rambling through that you wanted to add from there. But feel free to use the chat. I can completely fill up the space and continue to ramble. So, nobody came back with the chat of like, are they going to watch the game today? Except for Adam on my team. Gee whiz, So if you go click on everyone, you can actually put in the chat if you have a question, or you can do it to just the panelists. We'll leave that open for just a minute. But really the goal today, again, was really to go through a process for us to go and talk about the specifics of how we can help and what that process looks like. Kurtis, anything you'd add?
No, I don't. I just want to get back on and say thank you. Really great overview of everything there. And, just kind of reiterate that, once we kind of realized what you guys were doing, that it was kind of how, not much of a how, but a when can we do something together here. And most things are about timing, and just feel like the timing is right with everything you have going on and the changes and the sunset of the CAT. So again, thank you for taking the time today to do this.
Yeah, for sure. My pleasure. I enjoy getting on these, and I think really part of um, what my goal is to make sure that you and your team kind of understand. So again, be on the lookout for webinars. If you want to see and make sure we get the list, Katie, appreciate you putting there. Just put webinars, and we'll make sure that we get you the links. If you want the dynamic of the free trial, just put free trial. And from that side. And then Denise had a question. I'll kind of open it up and just kind of read this. So does your system do not only the CAT, but IT risk assessment, vendor, and others? It does, Denise, absolutely. That dry methodology, geez, my co-founder and his Jedi mind trick he did on me of that don't repeat yourself, absolutely applies. And you can also choose just the CAT. You could choose just InfoSec governance. You could choose just vendor. So there's some flexibility in there. And Kurtis said this on the front end. Look, we understand community banks really well. So as part of that process, we understand the challenges and the dynamics that you're going through associated. So usually what we try to do, and this is really for everybody, but Denise, as you were putting that question, we try to have a meeting with our team just to understand what you have in place today. And then from there, we can talk about how we can help. Rather than just talking about everything we can do, we can tune the conversations and the discussions from there. So one of the things that's been really fun to watch, and I mentioned this a couple of times. I'm up over 25 years now working with community bankers. And I've just officially decided I'm just going to do 25 plus now anytime I say it, just so I don't have to continue to count the numbers. One of the things that's been truly amazing that we're excited about is the way that DCI customers trust DCI. And from the get-go, I'll tell you from a vendor perspective, I see that in the way that they interact, the way that they have conversations, and the way that they choose partners. And we look forward to continuing the conversations with you. And again, if there's anything that we can help, let us know. And we'll take it and run from there. And with all that being said, if there aren't any other questions, drum roll, drum roll, drum roll, I will let you get back to your day. Hopefully your lunch that maybe you were eating while we were going through was phenomenal. And I hope you have a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week. Thanks so much. Cheers. Bye-bye.